Okay, now with a good historical grounding of this topic of ethos or character, we can talk about the two main kinds of ethos today, and we'll spend the most of the time on invented ethos, since that'll be the thing you're creating for the most part in this paper and in your presentation, and not just for a senior thesis here, but this is an important idea for every kind of paper that you write, every conversation you have, especially in the months ahead when you go to a new school setting and meet totally new people and, grow up and move away and perhaps start whole new lives. Then this is the kind of thing you'll actually be doing for a great deal of your life in the months and years ahead. So a very important topic. Let's get into it here. So two kinds of ethos: invented ethos and situated ethos. Invented ethos is that character that you create that's suitable to the occasion, whatever the nature of the enterprise, whether it's a speech or a paper, as you said, conversation. There are different factors involved in the kinds of words that you choose, the tone that you take, whatever you're doing, whether it's analyzing or just persuading or introduction, directions, whatever it is for a speech or paper, conversation. That situation is going to require you to present yourself as a certain kind of person, hopefully authoritative, and there are different ways to create that character, used especially, as we'll see in a moment, when the audience doesn't know who you are. The other kind of ethos or character is called situated ethos. That is basically your reputation, that people think about you and know when they hear your name, they react a certain way. Like, yes, that's that person. Hopefully it's a good reputation in the community. Maybe it's a bad reputation, but when you get to that, speech or paper, that situated ethos is possibly going to affect the audience already, and maybe that will help you when you invent your ethos for that situation, or maybe it will be not in your favor if you have a bad reputation. So situated ethos is certainly more difficult to change, but especially for long-term things, you can work on it now. Say, for example, your thesis presentation is a few months away. If your situated ethos, if your reputation is not as great as you want it to be, well, don't give up and don't despair. You can work on that right now. And in a couple of videos, we'll talk about ways you can do that. So, invented ethos, this is the thing you'll be doing quite a bit here for this paper and just the months and years ahead. All right, especially, as we said, with an audience that doesn't know you, doesn't know your character, you want to present yourself, I would assume, as a trustworthy, honest sort of person. So, ethics, says Aristotle, are very important when the facts are in doubt, right? We all have those friends or, associates that if, based on who we know, if they're trustworthy or a joker or, prankster or something like that, if they tell us something important, we might doubt them. But if that's the friend that we know is always trustworthy and reliable, if they tell us the same thing, we'll probably be more eager or willing to believe that, fair-minded or trustworthy person more when the facts are a little unclear. So, as you said, the issues aren't always about the facts, especially when you're dealing with ethos and character, right? So, there are always mistakes that can be made with character, and certainly, this is a pretty sort of non-moral issue that we're talking about, though there is certainly some morality involved here in 2 and 3, but this is, as Christians, certainly something that we can overcome and certainly try to avoid, perhaps even more so than a secular audience would when talking about just classical character. All right, so the first mistake is fairly common, just happens when you don't really know what you're talking about. Inexperienced or uninformed rhetors sometimes draw wrong conclusions. And it happens to all of us, especially in the digital age of skimming headlines through social media, not really understanding the full story. You can draw wrong conclusions from not having as much information as you want, and that might not always be your fault, but it can be easily remedied if you spend more time learning things, and we'll talk about ways to address and resolve these mistakes pretty soon. All right, so inexperienced, young people don't have the life experience or just the education, the background to the, common knowledge base to say correct things about, especially, long-term issues. Second mistake that, young rhetors sometimes make, and certainly a worse one, is, character flaws will make you hide the true facts for whatever reason. Maybe you don't want to get in trouble, or greedy for the situation, dishonesty about something, and so that's the wrong thing to say or do, but you're afraid of a worse punishment, something like that, knowing full well that most of the time, especially like in family situations, if you hide the fact that you are guilty for breaking something or whatever it is, if you would just be honest in the first place, your punishment or consequences would be probably not so bad if you lie about it, but sometimes we all make that extra mistake on top of it. So hiding the true facts, especially when you're speaking to people, if you know something is true and you don't, that's a pretty bad situation. And you can probably think of quite a number of political situations and historical people that have lied to the audiences, and obviously you don't want to be that sort of person. And the third mistake, maybe worst of all, but it's not really a contest, is sometimes a rhetor just won't even care what the audience does with this information. They don't have enough goodwill or investment in the well-being and the lives of the audience that they don't give a good advice even if they could. And that's, that lack of emotion, that lack of apathy could be even worse than lying, but let's not fight about it. But clearly, mistakes 2 and 3 are clearly worse than just not really knowing what you're talking about. And unless you are pretending you know what you're talking about and just to get a job or something, then that'd be bad. So don't do those things. So the way to solve those problems, or one in a rhetorical sense, you solve your inexperience problem by becoming intelligent and knowing what you're actually talking about. Not just seeming to be intelligent, as it says here, but actually learning what the category is. Be of good moral character. Don't hide facts, and don't be dishonest. Don't be greedy. Don't try to look better than you actually are. You can phrase things positively, but don't be a deceptive, dishonest, sinful person. And the way to combat not caring about your audience is to actually care. Make sure you're talking about things that matter to you, and make sure it comes across that you really are interested in it, and you want the audience to believe what you want to believe. You want to improve their lives with the fact that you are telling them things that they should know and ways that they should behave. And so possess goodwill and figure out this is how you can become a better person. So let's look at ways that you can solve those character issues and why it's important to create a character. Okay, so demonstrating good character for your audience, well, like say, especially, doing the homework. A lot of this will be the research that you're going to start very soon and for the next several months. Prove that you know what you're talking about, especially if you're talking about some sort of technical subject matter. If you're talking about medicine, you can't just say, well, they take this medicine, they take this pill, and that magically makes it all go away. That you got to know biology and physiology and things like that. What is the nature of this medicine, and how does it affect the neurons, the nerves, whatever it might be. Okay, know what you're actually talking about. Acknowledge that you are biased. Acknowledge that you are someone who cares about this issue. You have a background. You have a particular slant, and maybe you're in favor of the situation. You grew up on an organic farm, and so you were raised in that culture, and so this is why you believe that eating organic food is better than processed food or something like that. Tell your audience, this is why I believe what I believe. That if they find it out later that you have some sort of investment in the issue, they might be less willing to believe you. But if you are honest and open and say, this is who I am, this is why I know what I'm talking about, they might be more eager to believe you in the first place. Okay? Avoid making irrelevant or trivial arguments. That seems fairly obvious, but we certainly live in an age, especially in the world of sports, that try to make big deals out of non-relevant statistics or improper sample sizes and things like that. Especially, like, for example, in just 2 or 3 weeks into a football season, people jump to ridiculous conclusions based on 1 or 2 or 3 games. So you want to avoid that, especially when you're talking about important issues in your senior thesis. And for the rest of your life, too. And don't make arguments based on opinion or unrepresentative statistics. That is also, a damaging and hurtful thing to do. Not that opinions are necessarily bad, but if you're trying to state a real, factual case based on just what people feel without actually knowing it, looking at history, looking at scientific data, things like that, you want to make sure that your arguments are sound and really represent the truth of the issue. Okay, so establish good character, like you said, be open about your character. The classical world was always, eager to hear why people were qualified to speak. Feel free, and certainly today, do that as well. Weaken the aspersions against you. Here's why you're qualified to speak. Here's your history. Feel free to talk about yourself and why you are a qualified, authoritative person on this issue. Don't just say, well, I had to pick a thesis, so I read a few things about it, so I've been doing it for 5 months. That's why you are going to pick a thesis that you care about and that you're going to really be invested in already. And that will help a lot more than me just assigning a particular topic for you. Okay? It's still an issue today. We always have presuppositions about different people, different roles in society, locations, birthplaces, things like that. Sometimes it's inaccurate, sometimes it's accurate. We're not talking to the extreme of prejudice and things like that, obviously, which is obviously a terrible thing. But knowing your audience and having if you're speaking to a group of people that is in this group for a reason, whether they're like actors, there are presuppositions that you can have and speak to them. Those commonplaces that we talked about, you can use those commonplaces to talk about your character, why you're qualified to speak to them, things like that. So obviously you would avoid faulty reasoning, bad evidence. You certainly don't want to threaten, especially if the judges ask you a difficult question in your senior thesis defense. You don't start threatening them or name calling them. Obviously that's, as a Christian, you would never do any of that anyway. So lies, you just avoid that for your entire life, of course. So, movie reviewers, book jackets, these sorts of things sometimes can be good examples of why people are qualified to review this or give you their opinions. Sometimes they're not so good. So there's always a task of you, the consumer, evaluating, is this character, is this source of information reputable, things like that, right? Achieve goodwill, refer to yourself humbly. Cicero says, weaken those aspersions against you. Tell people, here what my flaws are, but here's how I've overcome those flaws, and treat with a humble or a submissive spirit. Certainly as a Christian, you'd want to do that, but still be confident in telling your audience, yes, I have been dealing with this issue for over 12 years. I've thought about it. I've gone to camps. I've gone to workshops about this. I've spent several years, several summers, doing this work, as a volunteer and as a job. So I know I have, a reason why I'm saying this to you about this thesis, but I'm also qualified to tell you. Be honest and open with your audience, and they will achieve that sort of goodwill. Just like you said, movie reviewers, things like that are good examples of here's my experience, here's my background, here's why you can trust me. On the other hand, we've got things like news journalists who seem to be, especially in today's age, that they're just creating characters just to keep the interest of the audience, whether or not they're trustworthy or not. They want to seem trustworthy, but whether they are or not is, probably going to be dependent upon your view of the station or the newspaper, the source itself. So achieving goodwill can be a challenging thing in different ways. Right? So, tell your audience, with that issue of Kairos, and then why they need to know it, why it's important for them to believe and hear what you have to say, and, be honest so they don't find out that you have other reasons why you're hiding and why you're promoting a product or promoting something, a situation like an advertisement. People are usually pretty skeptical to things that sound like advertisements anyway. And so you as a student can achieve goodwill with your audience, especially in your homework for this thesis and every other time, basically by just following directions. You're probably not going to impress the teacher or your professor at college. You're not going to tell them new things that they've never heard or seen or thought about before. So you show goodwill by doing the work the way they ask you to do it, fully and to the best of your ability. And so that is, especially in written form now as a senior and then going in ahead into the college level, if you are going to college level, whatever it is ahead of you, you do what you're told to do, follow directions to the best of your ability. That is really the best way to sort of create that good character for a paper especially, and for the senior thesis as well. So do all the parts, do them all well, and there's certainly some other factors involved, but that's just a basic way to achieve goodwill as a student, things like that. So creating a character, as you invent your character, there are a lot of important reasons why to do it, and those are just some brief little ways on why it's important to do it the right way, because you really want to show your audience you care about them, you're the right kind of person, and you should be listened to. All right, we'll continue with another video on another important issue of rhetorical distance. Stay tuned.